Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back in time, not just to a different place, but to a different feeling, a different kind of hunger. We're going to explore what it was like to eat, or more often, not eat, in the Soviet Union. This isn't a story of grand battles or political intrigue, but of the quiet, persistent, and deeply personal struggle for a loaf of bread or a bag of potatoes. It's a story about how a nation's dinner table can tell you more about its soul than any propaganda poster. Your modern taste buds, accustomed to variety and flavor, would probably stage a protest on day one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, I'd love to know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see where these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is thick with the smell of wood, smoke, and damp earth. It's 1916. The Great War is raging somewhere far to the west. A dull, abstract rumble that you only hear about in hushed conversations at the village market. For you, here in this small wooden house, where IZBA, life is measured by more immediate things, the seasons, the sun, and the familiar weight of a full belly. Your world is small, but it's whole. Outside the single, small paned window, you can see the vast, flat expanse of the Russian countryside, sleeping under a thin blanket of early snow. Inside, it's warm, the heart of the home, the massive clay and brick stove, the peck, radiates a steady, comforting heat that fills the single room you share with your family. It's a stove for heating, for sleeping on, and most importantly, for cooking. Right now, your mother is pulling a loaf of bread from its cavernous mouth. It's not the white, fluffy bread you might imagine. This is cherny black bread. It's dense, heavy, made from coarse, rye flour. The crust is so hard it almost crackles, and when she cuts into it with a worn-down knife, the steam that escapes carries a rich, slightly sour, earthy aroma that is the very definition of food. This bread is the center of every meal, the bedrock of your diet. You eat it with everything, and sometimes it's all you have. For you, its taste is not just sustenance, it's security. On the stove, a pot of sky simmers. It's a simple cabbage soup, a cornerstone of Russian peasant cuisine for centuries. There's no meat in it today, just cabbage, a few carrots and onions from the root cellar, and maybe a potato or two, all swimming in a thin, watery broth. Your mother adds a spoonful of sour cream, smetana, from a clay pot, and the soup is transformed, gaining a creamy tang that cuts through the humble flavor of the cabbage. You dip your slab of black bread into the hot soup, letting it soak up the liquid until it's soft and warm. This is the rhythm of your life. The food is monotonous. Yes, it's potatoes, beets, cabbage, and grains, day in and day out. Kosher, a thick buckwheat porridge, is your breakfast, often cooked overnight in the residual heat of the peck. But it's yours. Most of it comes from the small plot of land your family works, or from the forest. Summer was a time of frantic activity, not just for the harvest, but for foraging. You remember spending long, sun-drenched afternoons in the woods with your siblings, your fingers stained purple from picking wild berries, your basket heavy with mushrooms that your grandmother taught you how to identify. Everything was then salted, pickled, or dried for the long, hungry winter. In the corner of the room, the samovar begins to hum. This is a uniquely Russian contraption, a large, ornate metal urn used to boil water for tea. Its gentle, simmering sound is the background music to your evenings. Tea drinking isn't just about quenching thirst. It's a ritual. The whole family gathers around the small table as hot water is poured into a tiny teapot filled with a potent brew, which is then diluted in each cup. You hold the warm glass, sweetened with a small lump of sugar that you hold between your teeth, and listen to the adults talk. Life is not easy. There are lean times. You've heard whispers of famines in other regions, years when the harvest failed. Historians still fiercely debate just how good things were before the storm. Some point to the statistics of massive grain exports as a sign of terrorist Russia's agricultural strength, while others argue that this very export came at the cost of the peasants who grew it, leaving them perpetually on a knife's edge of survival. For you, though, in this moment, there is a sense of predictability. The land, though harsh, provides. The seasons, though unforgiving, follow a pattern you understand. You know the taste of real milk from your neighbor's cow, the sweetness of a carrot pulled straight from the frozen earth. You finish your soup. The last crumb of bread is gone. The warmth of the food in the stove makes your eyelids heavy. Outside, the wind howls a lonely sigh. You don't know it yet, but this simple, predictable world is about to be shattered. The very definition of food, of security, of a full stomach, is about to be rewritten. The lingering, sour scent of the rye bread in the air is a memory you will cling to, a ghost of a life that is about to vanish forever. The wind carries more than just the scent of snow now. It carries whispers, rumors, fragments of news that travel from village to village like wildfire in dry grass. The Tsar is gone. A new government has taken his place. No, another new government has taken their place. The stories are confusing, contradictory, but one message begins to cut through the noise, clear and sharp as a church bell on a frosty morning. One day, a man arrives in your village. HES not from around here. HES then, with a feverish look in his eyes, and he wears a worker's cap and a long, dark coat. He doesn't go to the elder or the priest. He stands in the middle of the muddy track that serves as a main street, and he speaks. He speaks with a loudness and a certainty that is both frightening and magnetic. He, and others like him, bring with them posters, printed on cheap paper with crude but powerful images in stark red and black. You can read the words, but you don't need to. You see a heroic, muscular worker smashing the chains of a bloated, top-headed figure. You see a peasant standing tall, scythe in hand, over a vast, golden field that is finally his. And you hear the words, the promise. It's a slogan of just 3 words, but it contains an entire universe of hope. Mir, Jeholim, Isemlia, peace, bread, and land, peace. The war, that meat grinder far to the west, that has already claimed your uncle and your neighbor's eldest son, will end. The soldiers will come home. No more families will be shattered by a telegram bearing a black cross. You see the relief wash over your mother's face, a loosening of a tension she has carried for years. Land, the vast estates of the local nobleman, who you only ever saw as a distant figure in a fine carriage, will be yours. The fields you and your ancestors have tilled for centuries, for the benefit of another, will now belong to the people who work them. You can almost feel the rich, dark soil running through your fingers, no longer a symbol of servitude, but of ownership. And then there is bread. Caleb. This is the most powerful word of all. It's not an abstract concept like peace or a future dream like land. It's immediate. It's visceral. It's the answer to the gnawing anxiety in your stomach. The promise isn't just for some bread, but for an abundance of it. No more rationing. No more stretching a single loaf to last a week. The new leaders, these Bolsheviks, they say the hoarding and speculation that doctor up prices will end. The grain will be taken from the rich and given to the hungry. For you, this sounds like justice. It sounds like salvation. This promise is delivered with an almost religious fervor. Sometimes, a bizarre and wonderful thing called an idiot train pulls into the nearest station. It's a train painted with slogans and revolutionary art, carrying a printing press, a small cinema, and a cohort of passionate speakers. This is a fashionably strange and specific piece of early Soviet propaganda machinery. They would show short, silent films to crowds of villagers who had never seen moving pictures before. A powerful and almost magical experience. The message was simple and repeated endlessly. The old world is dead. A new one is being born, and it will be a world of plenty. Historians still argue about the true intentions behind these words. Was it a calculated slogan? A perfect key designed to unlock the gates of power by tapping into the deepest desires of the Russian people? Or was it born from a genuine, if perhaps wildly naive, belief that a new world, free from hunger and exploitation, was truly possible for the men and women crafting the message? Did they truly believe they could re-engineer society to deliver on this promise of bread? Or was it simply the most effective tool to win the support of millions? You, however, are not a historian. You are a person living through it, and you choose to believe. The hope is intoxicating. A warm drink after a lifetime of cold. And the evenings, gathered around the semaphore. The conversation is no longer about the weather or the harvest, but about the future. A future where your children will never know the fear of a lean winter. A future where the black bread is always on the table, not as a ration, but as a right. The nobleman's manor has been ransacked. Its owners fled. A local committee, a Soviet, has been formed. Men from the village, people you've known your whole life, now walk with a new sense of purpose, wearing red armbands. They speak of collecting the grain from the central storehouses for fair distribution. It all feels like the beginning of something momentous. The air is electric with change. You fall asleep not with the familiar worry of scarcity, but with a new, thrilling dream of abundance. The promise of bread has been made. Surely, the bread itself will follow. The dream of abundance is a beautiful, fragile thing, and it shatters quickly. The peace you are promised turns into a bloody, chaotic civil war. The Reds, the Bolsheviks, are fighting the Whites, a loose and fractious coalition of everyone who opposes them. Armies sweep back and forth across your land, and each one is hungry. The real change, the one that you feel in the pit of your stomach, is a new policy. It has a stark, unyielding name. War Communism. The promise of bread, you quickly learn, comes with a very heavy price. One morning, a group of men arrives in your village. They are not the hopeful agitators from before. These men are different. They are armed. They are members of a broader vast orbis, a grain requisitioning squad. They have come for the K-Lib. All of it. You watch as they go from house to house, from barn to barn. They are not asking. They are taking. They have quotas to fill. Numbers on a piece of paper handed down from some distant, faceless committee. They search everywhere, poking bayonets into haystacks, digging up the floors of root cellars, your family's winter stores, the sacks of rye and wheat you worked all year to grow and harvest, the food meant to keep you alive until the next spring, are piled onto carts and hauled away. They tell you it's for the war effort, for the heroic Red Army soldiers fighting at the front, for the starving workers in the cities. They say it is your revolutionary duty. They leave you with a small, calculated amount, a bare minimum they believe is enough to prevent starvation. But their calculations are made in an office, not in a freezing wooden hut. They don't account for a sick child, for a harsher than expected winter, for the simple human need for a little more than the bare minimum. This is the reality of food requisitioning. It wasn't just a tax. It was the state asserting total control over the food supply. You planted it, you tended it, you harvested it, but it was not yours. It belonged to the state. The act of hiding food, of trying to keep a little extra for your family, becomes a counter-revolutionary act. Your neighbor, who was found to have buried a sack of potatoes, is labeled a kulak, a rich peasant, an enemy of the people. It doesn't matter that he's just as poor as everyone else. The label is a weapon. He is beaten and his family is left with nothing. The fear is constant. You learn to be creative. You learn to hide things in the hollows of trees, under the floorboards in the one spot you hope they won't check, or even in false graves in the village cemetery. A strange and chilling little detail from this time is the rise of the bagmen, or meshokniki. These were people, often from the starving cities, who would travel into the countryside on packed, dangerous trains, carrying bags of city goods, a pair of boots, a metal tool, a piece of cloth, to try and barter directly with peasants like you for a few handfuls of flour or a couple of potatoes, all in defiance of the state monopoly. Their existence was illegal, a testament to the complete failure of the official system. The vibrant village market, where you once traded goods and gossip, is gone. Private trade is now illegal, branded as speculation. The natural, centuries-old connection between the city and the countryside has been severed, replaced by the armed requisitioning squadron, the desperate, illegal bagmen. Historians continue to debate the necessity and brutality of war communism. Was it a pragmatic, if ruthless, response to the extreme pressures of civil war and foreign intervention, the only way to keep the army and the industrial centers fed? Or was it an early attempt to implement pure communist ideology, to eliminate private property and markets entirely, regardless of the human cost? The truth, as is often the case, is likely a messy combination of both. For you, the academic debate is meaningless. The reality is this: the fields outside are the same. The sun rises and sets as it always has. But the food is gone. The black bread, once a symbol of security, is now a ghost. The pot of sky on the stove is thinner than ever, often just hot water with a few stray cabbage leaves. The promise of bread has been broken, replaced by an emptiness that echoes from the state granaries to your own stomach. The huoja, both literal and metaphorical, are now completely empty, and you are learning the first, most important lesson of this new era. The hand that promises to feed, you can also be the hand that takes everything away. The countryside has been stripped bare, so you make a desperate choice. You join the flood of people heading for the cities, Petrograd, or maybe Moscow. You've heard the propaganda. The cities are the heart of the revolution, the home of the proletariat. Surely, there must be food there. Surely, the workers who forged the new world are being fed. You arrive, gaunt and weary, into a landscape of stone and shadow. The city is just as hungry as the village, but the hunger here feels different. It's more organized, more bureaucratic, more coldly impersonal. The first thing you must do is get your papers in order. Your entire existence is now tied to a small, flimsy booklet, stamped and signed by a dozen different officials. Without it, you are an unperson. With it, you are entitled to the single most important document of this era, the ration card, the kartotka. This little piece of cardstock is now the key to your survival. It is divided into a grid of tiny squares, each one representing a specific item and a specific date. A square for bread, a square for sugar, a square for groats. On the designated day, you take your card to a state-run distribution point, usually a bleak, uninviting storefront with empty windows, and stand in line. And the lines, the lines, they are a living, breathing entity, a serpent of hunched shoulders and hollow eyes that snakes for blocks around the corner. In rain or freezing snow, you spend hours, sometimes entire days. In these queues, you learn the particular social etiquette of the line, how to mark your place with a stone if you need to step away for a moment, the quiet solidarity of shared misery, the flash of anger when someone tries to cut ahead. When you finally reach the counter, a grim-faced clerk takes your carton with a pair of scissors, snips out the appropriate square. In exchange, you are handed your portion. The bread is a revelation, and not in a good way. It's called firewood bread. It's heavy, damp, and dark, but not from wholesome rye. It's filled with whatever extenders they could find: sawdust, clay, straw, oilseed cakes normally used for animal feed. It tastes gritty and sour, but to eat it, you have to. You quickly discover that not all ration cards are created equal. This is the brutal, unspoken secret of the new classless society. The system is built on a rigid hierarchy. At the very top are the high-ranking party officials, the military elite, and key industrial managers. Their ration cards are generous, granting them access to special closed distribution centers where butter, meat, and even wine might be available. Then come the shock workers in critical industry, the soldiers of the Red Army. Their rations are smaller but still enough to sustain them. Below them are other workers, office clerks, and so on, with progressively smaller rations. And at the very bottom are the licentiae, the disenfranchised. These are the former nobles, the priests, the bourgeoisie, the merchants. Their ration cards are practically worthless, granting them a pittance of food designed not for survival, but for a slow, managed decline. Your status, your profession, your perceived loyalty to the state now directly determines how much your life is worth in grams of bread. A fascinating and rather bleak little piece of trivia from this period is the academic ration. Scientists and intellectuals deemed crucial to the state were given a slightly better ration to keep their minds functioning. It was a pragmatic, if chilling, Calculation. A professor's brain was a national resource, and it needed fuel, just like a blast furnace. The state literally measured out survival based on perceived utility. Historians are still untangling the complex web of the Soviet rationing system. Was it a purely ideological tool, designed to reward the loyal and punish the class enemies? Or was it a desperate, pragmatic attempt to manage an almost complete collapse of the food supply chain, prioritizing those deemed most essential for the state's survival? The answer, as is so often the case, is that it was both. It was a system born of scarcity but shaped by ideology. You are somewhere in the middle of this vast pyramid of hunger. Your daily ration is never quite enough. The gnawing feeling in your stomach is a constant companion. You eye the squares on your kurtakal, counting the days until your next meager portion of cereal or salted fish. The card is your lifeline, but it's also your chain. It tethers you to the state, to the queue, to the daily ritual of uncertainty. You left the village to escape the emptiness of the fields, only to find the emptiness of the city shelves. The promise of bread has become a bureaucratic transaction, a cold calculation of your worth, snipped out one square at a time, just when it feels like the entire country is about to crumble into a dust of firewood bred in bureaucratic forms. The wind changes direction again. The year is 1921. The Civil War is sputtering to an end, but the country is in ruins. Peasant uprisings, fueled by the brutal grain requisitions, are rampant. Sailors' rebellion at the naval base of Kronstadt, once the pride of the revolution, sends a shockwave through the leadership. They are chanting for Soviets without Bolsheviks, a cry that cannot be ignored. The state is on the brink of collapse. And then, Lenin, in a stunning tactical retreat, announces a new policy. It's called the New Economic Policy, or NEP. For you, living in the gray, hungry city, the change is almost immediate and utterly bewildering. It's like watching a film run in reverse. One day, the state-run shops are empty, their windows covered in dust and propaganda posters. The next, it seems, small private shops begin to crack open their doors like crocuses after a long winter. The first things you notice are the smells. The rich, intoxicating aroma of baking bread. Real bread, made from actual flour. The scent of sizzling butter. Of roasting sunflower seeds. These are smells you thought you had forgotten. The government has ended the forced grain requisitions. Instead, the peasants now pay a tax in kind, a fixed portion of their harvest. Crucially, whatever is left over, they are allowed to sell in the open market. And just like that, the markets are back. They spring up spontaneously in city squares, chaotic, loud, and vibrant. Peasants from the countryside arrive with carts laden with produce, potatoes, onions, eggs, milk, trees, and sometimes, if you are very lucky, a piece of meat. The bagmen, once criminals risking their lives, are now legitimate traders. A new figure emerges, the NEP man. These are the entrepreneurs, the middlemen, the restaurateurs. They are energetic, often flamboyant figures who thrive in this new semi-capitalist environment. They open small restaurants, cafes, and shops. Suddenly, you can buy things with money again. The worthless, hyper-inflated currency begins to stabilize. The ration cards, while not completely abolished, become less and less important as more food flows into the open market. You walk through the city streets, and it's a surreal experience. A restaurant window, which for years displayed nothing but a faded portrait of Lenin, now has a handwritten menu taped to it. You can't afford to eat there. Of course, the prices are astronomical, but you can look. You can see well-dressed NEP men inside, clinking glasses and eating plates of chicken and dumplings. It's a world away from your own life, but its very existence feels like a miracle. One of the more peculiar and symbolic products of this era was the reappearance of luxury goods. Things like ice cream, once an impossible bourgeois fantasy, started being sold by street vendors. It was a small, simple pleasure, but it represented a seismic shift away from the stark austerity of war communism. For a small coin, you could taste something sweet, cold, and utterly unnecessary. a tiny rebellion against the grim utilitarianism of the preceding years. For you, the change is more practical. You can now take the small amount of money you earn from your factory job and supplement your meager rations at the market. You can buy a few extra potatoes, a bottle of milk, maybe some butter. The constant, grinding fear of starvation begins to recede. The hollow feeling in your stomach is replaced by a tentative, cautious sense of hope. You can even afford a small pleasure now and then, like a handful of roasted sunflower seeds. SCMK, which you crack between your teeth as you walk, spitting the shells onto the pavement. It's a simple, universal Russian pastime that had all but disappeared. Of course, the ideological whiplash is immense. For years, you were told that private trade was the ultimate evil, that profit was a crime, that the market was a tool of bourgeois exploitation. Now, the state itself is encouraging it. The very people who were recently demonized as speculators are now lauded as a necessary part of the economic recovery. Historians are still fascinated by the NEP. Was it a genuine admission by Lenin that the pure socialist model had failed and that some form of market economy was necessary for survival? Or was it, as he famously put it, a case of taking one step backward to take 2 steps forward later? Was it a strategic, temporary concession to get the country back on its feet before resuming the march toward full communism? The arguments are endless. Some scholars see the NEP as a lost golden age, a path not taken that could have led to a more humane, market-oriented socialism. Others see it as a necessary, but ultimately doomed compromise. A brief pause before the storm of Stalinism. You don't know about any of that. You just know that for the first time in years, there is food. The markets are noisy, the smells are real, and your belly is, if not full, at least not painfully empty. You watch the NEP men in their fancy coats, and you feel a mix of envy and gratitude. They are a sign of the inequality you were told the revolution would abolish, but they are also the reason you can buy a loaf of bread that doesn't taste like sawdust. You are living in a contradiction, a fragile, temporary truce between the irreconcilable worlds, and you are eating. For now, that is enough. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the NEP era feels like it could last forever. A new, complicated normal, but it's a false spring. By the late 1922, the era begins to change again. Woman is dead. A power struggle has been raging behind the Kremlin walls. A quiet, vicious battle of whispers, alliances, and purges. A new name begins to dominate every conversation, every newspaper headline. Stalin, he is a man of a different temperament. Where Lenin was pragmatic enough to take a step back, Stalin sees only the need to leap forward, no matter the cost. He and his allies look at the NEP not with gratitude, but with suspicion and impatience. They see the NEP man, the private traders, not as saviors but as a new bourgeoisie, a capitalist, cancer growing within the socialist state. They see the peasants, who are now feeding the country, as unreliable, petty capitalist elements who are holding the state hostage by controlling the food supply. The official term you start to hear everywhere is the scissors crisis. It's a term used to describe the widening gap between the high prices of industrial goods, the things the peasants need to buy, and the low prices the state is willing to pay for agricultural products, the things they have to sell. In your factory, you see it firsthand. The tools and machinery are old and inefficient. Production is low. In the countryside, the peasants see no point in selling their grain to the state for next to nothing, so they hoard it or feed it to their livestock instead. The flow of food to the cities begins to dry up again. The queues, which had shortened during the NEP, start to lengthen once more. The decision is made. The NEP is to be dismantled. The brief experiment with markets and private enterprise is over. Stalin declares a new direction, a policy of breathtaking ambition and terrifying scale. He calls it the Great Turn or the Great Break. It is a declaration of war on the old ways of life, a plan to drag the Soviet Union kicking and screaming into an industrial future. This plan has two main pillars. The first is rapid, forced industrialization. New factories, new dams, new cities will spring up from nothing. The second, and the one that will define your life and your diet for decades to come, is the forced collectivization of agriculture. The millions of small, individual peasant farms are to be wiped out and consolidated into massive, state-controlled collective farms. The KOKOZY. The official reasoning is that these large, mechanized farms will be far more efficient than the small, traditional plots. They will use tractors and modern science to produce a surplus of grain that can be easily collected by the state to feed the new industrial workforce and to export for hard currency to buy foreign machinery. That is the plan on paper. The reality, as you begin to sense, is about control. By forcing the peasantry into collective farms, the state will break their independence once and for all. It will destroy the very concept of private ownership of land and transform the peasants from independent producers into rural proletarians, wage earners working for the state. Food will no longer be something you grow. It will be something the state allows you to have. A bizarre but telling detail of this period is the propaganda surrounding the tractor. The tractor became a near mythical symbol of modernity and progress. Posters and films depicted it as a glorious iron hero, plowing away the backwardness of the past. In reality, there were very few tractors, and the ones that existed often broke down with no spare parts or trained mechanics to fix them. But the idea of the tractor was a powerful weapon in the ideological war against the traditional peasant way of life. Historians are still grappling with the sheer audacity and brutality of this moment. Was the great turn an economic necessity to modernize a backward country and prepare for a future war, as some have argued? Or was it primarily an ideological crusade, a revolution from above designed to consolidate Stalin's power and eliminate any and all opposition to his vision of a totalitarian state? The debate highlights the tension between stated economic goals and the grim political reality. For you, these high-level plans and ideological debates translate into a simple, creeping dread. The NEP and disappear from the streets, their shops boarded up. Many are arrested and exiled. The market stalls in the city square become sparse and then vanish. The ration card, which had become almost irrelevant, is once again the most important object you owe. The memory of the NEP, with its smells of real bread and sizzling butter, begins to feel like a strange, unbelievable dream. You are standing on the precipice of a new, terrifying chapter. The state is no longer just taking a tax or managing the market. It is taking everything. The cold wind of a new, man-made winter is beginning to blow. The great turn is no longer a speech or a newspaper article. It is a truck rumbling into your village. It carries party activists from the city, zealous young members of the Komsomol, the communist youth league, and grim-faced officials. They are the 25,000ers, a vanguard of urban workers sent to the countryside to enforce collectivization. They are here to convince you, and when convincing fails, to compel you to sign away your life. You are gathered in the village square, the same place where you once heard the promise of land. Now, you are being told to give it up. You must join the KOKOZ, the collective farm, your small plot of land, your tools, your seeds, and, most painfully, your animals will no longer belong to you. They will become the property of the collective. The resistance is quiet but fierce. This land is everything. It's not just a source of food. It's your identity, your heritage, the only thing your family has ever truly owned. To give it up feels like a betrayal of your ancestors. But refusal is not an option. The activists have lists. They have identified the kulaks, the so-called rich peasants who are to be liquidated as a class. But the definition of a kulak is dangerously elastic. Yesterday, it was the man who hired a laborer. Today, it might be anyone with 2 cows instead of 1. Tomorrow, it could be anyone who speaks out against the collective farm. It becomes a tool to break the will of the village. Those labeled as kulaks have their property confiscated, their families rounded up, and are deported to the frozen wastes of Siberia or to forced labor camps. The message is clear. Join the KOKOZ, or you are next. Faced with this impossible choice, the peasants react with desperate, self-destructive defiance. If the state is going to take their animals, they will not let the state have them. A wave of slaughter sweeps the countryside. You hear the panicked lowing of cattle and the squeals of pigs in the night. People are killing their own livestock, the animals they have raised and cared for, the source of their milk, meat, and draft power. They gorge themselves on the meat in a last, fleeting feast, or they let it rot, or they try to sell it for pennies. Why should they hand over their beloved cow, their provider, to a faceless collective where it will be neglected and starved? The numbers are staggering. In a few short years, the Soviet Union loses about half of its cattle, half of its pigs, and nearly 2/3 of its sheep and goats. This isn't just an economic loss. It's an agricultural apocalypse. The draft animals needed to plow the fields are gone. The source of manure for fertilizer is gone. The source of milk and meat is gone. A particularly tragic and bizarre detail from this time is the fate of the horses. Horses were a peasant's most valuable asset. The mass slaughter meant that when it came time to plow the fields for the new collective farm, there were often no animals left. There are documented cases and haunting photographs of people, men and women, harnessing themselves to plows, pulling them through the mud like beasts of burden. The great leap forward into mechanized agriculture had, in reality, thrown parts of the country back into a pre-industrial nightmare. Historians still debate the motivations behind this decolonization and forced collectivization. The official line was that it was a necessary class struggle to break the power of rural capitalists. But many scholars argue it was a form of social engineering, a war waged by the state against its own peasantry to crush their independence and gain absolute control over the nation's food supply. It wasn't just about grain. It was about breaking the soul of the village. You watch as your neighbor's cow, the one that used to give your family milk, is led away by a communal activist who has never touched a farm animal in his life. You watch as your own few chickens are added to a communal coop. You sign the paper. You have no choice. You are now a member of the Red Dawn Collective Farm. You own nothing. You work in the same fields as before, but now you work for the state. You are promised a share of the harvest, but only after the state has taken its impossibly high quota. The sense of loss is profound. It's more than just losing property. You've lost your autonomy, your connection to the land, your ability to provide for yourself. The entire structure of your world has been dismantled. You look out over the familiar fields, now carved up into the vast, impersonal tracts of the Caucasus, and you feel a hollowness that no amount of food could ever fill. You have been collectivized. You are now a worker on the collective farm. You wake before dawn and trudge to the fields with the others. The work is harder than before. There's a new kind of exhaustion, a weariness that comes not just from physical labor, but from a lack of spirit. When the land was yours, every weed you pulled, every furrow you dug, was an investment in your own survival. Now, you are working for abstract quotas set by someone hundreds of miles away. The enthusiasm of the urban activists who forced you into this has long since faded, leaving behind only disorganization and despair. The first harvest under the new system is a disaster. The slaughter of the draft animals means fields are plowed late, or not at all. The seeds are often of poor quality, distributed late by an incompetent bureaucracy. People who have been farmers their whole lives are now told how to farm by party officials who can't tell wheat from barley. The delicate, traditional rhythms of agriculture have been replaced by chaotic, top-down commands. The result is a meager crop, far smaller than what the village used to produce on its own. And then the state procurement teams arrive. They are not like the requisition squads of the Civil War. They are more systematic, more ruthless. They have their quotas, and these quotas were based not on the actual, pathetic harvest, but on the fantasy projections of the central planners. They ignore the reality of the withered stalks and empty barns. They are here to take their share, and their share is everything. They sweep through the collective's granaries, taking almost all of the grain. You and the other collective members are left with scraps, not even enough to replace the seed for next year's planting, let alone to feed your families through the winter. The state has taken the harvest, and now it wants more. They claim the peasants are hiding grain, sabotaging the socialist project. Teams go house to house again, using long metal rods to probe the ground, the walls, the ovens, searching for any hidden cache of food. It is in this atmosphere of terror and desperation that a new law is passed in August 1932. Officially, it's called the Decree on the Protection of Socialist Property, but everyone knows it by its chilling nickname, the Spicolette Law, or the Law of 5 Years of Corn. The law is simple and brutal. It states that any theft of collective farm property, which includes anything and everything grown in the fields, is a crime against the state. The punishment is a 10-year sentence in a labor camp, or, in aggravating circumstances, death by firing squad. And theft is defined in the broadest possible terms. This means that if you, a mother, walk past a field after the harvest and pick up a few fallen heads of wheat, a few spikelets that were missed by the combines, to take home and grind into a handful of flour for your starving children, you are a criminal. If your hungry son pulls a few potatoes from the ground of the collective field, he is a saboteur. The law creates a new kind of terror. Fields, which were once a source of life, are now a place of mortal danger. You see children, their bellies swollen from hunger, staring longingly at the potato fields, and you have to pull them away, your heart pounding with fear. You see guards, local men armed by the state, patrolling the edges of the fields, ready to enforce the law with merciless efficiency. Thousands upon thousands of people, many of them children, will be arrested under this law. A particularly cruel and well-documented aspect of this period was the use of towing boards or blackboards. See Hornedoshka. Villages or collective farms that failed to meet their grain quotas were placed on a blacklist. This meant a total blockade. All goods were removed from the local co-op store. All trade was forbidden. A cordon of secret police troops would be set up around the village to prevent anyone from leaving to search for food. It was, in effect, a collective death sentence, a deliberate policy of weaponizing starvation to punish disobedience. Historians continue to debate the exact intention behind the Spicolette Law. Was it a panic, extreme measure to stop the pilfering that was genuinely threatening the state's grain collection? Or was it a calculated instrument of terror, designed to break the last vestiges of peasant resistance and teach them that the food in the fields, down to the very last grain, belonged to the state and the state alone? The overwhelming evidence points towards the latter. It was a law not about protecting property, but about asserting absolute power. You live under the shadow of this law. Every time you walk past the fields, you feel its cold grip. You might see a single potato, half buried in the dirt, and your stomach clenches with hunger. But the fear is stronger. You hurry past, your eyes fixed on the ground, trying not to see. You are surrounded by food that you grew, yet you are forbidden to touch it. The final, absurd tragedy is complete. You are starving in a field of grain. The winter of 1932-1933 descends not like a blanket of snow, but like a shroud. The last of the grain has been taken. The Spicolette Law has made the fields a forbidden zone. The villages are isolated, cut off, and silent. This is no longer just hunger. This is famine. In the Ukraine, it will come to be known as the Holodomor, the death by hunger. But it is also ravaging the North Caucasus, the Volga region, Kazakhstan, and other parts of the Soviet Union. The world outside your hut shrinks to a single, primal focus, finding something, anything, to put in your mouth, to fill the agonizing, cramping emptiness in your stomach. The stored food is long gone. The hidden caches have been found or exhausted. Now, the desperate search for food surrogates begins. You start with the things that are merely unpleasant. You strip the bark from trees, grinding it into a coarse powder to mix with water. You dig up frozen acorns and horse chestnuts, boiling them for hours to remove the bitterness. You collect weeds, nettles, and thistles, whatever green things you can find poking through the snow, and make a thin, bitter soup. As the weeks drag on, the search becomes more desperate. You dig for hibernating animals in the frozen ground. Your fingers raw and numb. You catch mice, rats, sparrows, crows, anything that moves. You boil leather belts, shoes, and old harnesses until they soften into a gelatinous, foul-tasting jelly. You grind bones into a powder to add to your watery broth. Your body is a relentless machine, demanding calories, and your mind is forced into a terrifyingly creative spiral of survival. The village changes. The familiar sounds of life, children laughing, dogs barking, the lowing of a cow, are gone. The dogs and cats were among the first to be eaten. Now, there is only an eerie silence, broken by the whisper of the wind or the weak cry of a starving child. People no longer visit each other. Every household is an isolated island of suffering. You see your neighbors on the rare occasions you venture out, and you don't recognize them. Their faces are skeletal, their eyes sunken and lifeless, their bodies swollen with the grotesque bloating of starvation, a condition called edema, a strange and heart-wrenching detail from this period, recorded in numerous diaries and survivor testimonies, was the obsession with food. People would talk about food constantly. They would write down fantastical recipes for dishes they once ate or dreamed of eating. Children, too weak to play, would lie in their beds and describe imaginary feasts in painstaking detail. It was a form of mental escape, a way to fill the void in their minds when their stomachs were empty. The psychological torture of the famine was as acute as the physical pain. The state, meanwhile, continues to deny the famine's existence, while millions are starving. The Soviet Union is exporting grain to the West to fund its industrialization drive. Propaganda posters still show smiling, rosy-cheeked collective farmers standing before mountains of golden wheat. The borders of the afflicted regions are sealed by internal troops from the NKVD, the secret police. No one is allowed to leave to seek help in the cities. Any mention of the famine, in letters or conversation, is treated as anti-Soviet agitation. It is a silent, unaccountable apocalypse. This is the point of greatest controversy among historians. A debate that carries immense political and emotional weight to this day. Was the famine an unintended, tragic consequence of the disastrous collectivization policies, a case of catastrophic mismanagement and ideological blindness, or was it a deliberate, man-made famine, an act of genocide engineered by Stalin's regime to crush the Ukrainian peasantry and other targeted ethnic groups? Many prominent scholars, particularly in Ukraine, argue forcefully for the latter, pointing to the blacklisting of villages, the sealing of borders, and the continued grain exports as evidence of intent. Others maintain that while the regime's policies were criminal and inhumane, it was a result of brutal incompetence rather than a preconceived plan of extermination. The consensus, however, is that the state was, at the very least, criminally responsible for the deaths of millions of its own citizens. You are not thinking about history or intent. You are thinking about the next hour, the next minute. You look at your own family, at their gaunt faces and stick-thin limbs, and you feel a despair so profound it's almost a physical weight. The very fabric of humanity begins to fray. Stories of desperation leading to unthinkable acts circulate in hushed, terrified whispers. This is the ultimate consequence of the state's war on its own people. The promise of bread has led to this. A world where a boiled leather shoe is a meal, and a forgotten potato is a treasure worth more than gold. You are living through a horror that words cannot truly capture, a black hole of hunger that is consuming everything. In the midst of this nationwide famine, a strange rumor begins to circulate. It's a whisper of a place where the rules of starvation do not apply, a kind of parallel universe where food exists in abundance. But this place is not for you. It's not for the workers or the peasants. It requires a different kind of currency, a currency you might not know you possess. The place is called Torgsin. The name is an acronym for VS Isoyas Noyo Bedenen, Iwai Poter Govlies, in Ostrat Sami, the All-Union Association for Trade with Foreigners. Initially, these state-run stores were set up to serve foreign diplomats, engineers, and tourists, allowing them to buy goods using foreign currency, dollars, pounds, francs. But as the famine worsened and the state's need for hard currency to finance its industrialization plans became all-consuming, the mission of Torgsin expanded. Soviet citizens were now allowed to shop there, but with a crucial catch. They couldn't use rubles. They had to pay with gold, silver, platinum, diamonds, or foreign currency. Suddenly, you are forced to reevaluate everything you own, to look at your life through the eyes of a prospector. You ransack your own small hut, searching for ghosts of the past. That old silver cross your grandmother left you. It's no longer a symbol of faith. It's a potential bag of flour. Your mother's simple gold wedding band. It's not a memory of her love. It's a week's worth of potatoes. Your father's silver pocket watch. A relic from his brief time working in a city before the war. It's a chance to buy sugar or butter. You make the journey to the nearest city where a Torgsin store is located. The contrast is jarring and surreal. You walk through streets haunted by gaunt, starving figures, and then you arrive at the storefront. It might be an unassuming building, but inside, it's a different world. The shelves are stocked. Piled high, you see pyramids of canned goods, sacks of white flour and sugar, slabs of butter, long sausages, bottles of oil. It's a vision of paradise, an oasis of plenty in a desert of want. The air smells of soap and smoked fish and chocolate, a heady, dizzying cocktail of aromas you thought you'd never experience again. The customers are a strange mix. There are the foreigners, well-dressed and looking slightly bewildered. And then there are people like you, Soviet citizens, looking out of place in their worn, patched clothing, clutching a small, precious item. You stand in one line to have your treasure appraised by a stern-faced clerk who weighs it, tests it, and quotes you a price in Torgsin in rubles, a special voucher currency. Then you take your vouchers to another counter and point at the things you want to buy, things you haven't seen in years. This system was incredibly, brutally effective. A fascinating and grim statistic reveals that during the peak of the famine in 1933, the revenue from Torgsin, collected from starving citizens digging up their last heirlooms, accounted for a massive portion of the state's income, paying for nearly half of all industrial machinery imports that year. The state was literally fueling its modernization drive with the desperation of its people, exchanging the last vestiges of their personal and cultural heritage for calories. Historians see Torgsin as one of the most cynical and revealing institutions of the Stalinist era. It demonstrates the regime's absolute pragmatism and its complete disregard for its own ideology, while officially railing against the evils of capitalism and private wealth. The state created a system that relied entirely on the private hoarding of terrestrial valuables. It was a state-sponsored treasure hunt where the prize was survival. The academic debate here is less about if it was brutal and more about the sheer scale of the extraction and its direct link to funding the 5-year plan. Was it a plan part of the economic model from the start, or a desperate improvisation that became shockingly successful? You walk out of the Torgsin store, your hands trembling as you clutch a small bag of flour and a piece of salted lard. The amount of food feels pitifully small compared to the family treasure you traded for it. Back on the street, you are immediately plunged back into the gray, hungry reality. You hide the food under your coat, paranoid that someone will see it and try to steal it. The brief, dazzling vision of the stocked shelves makes the outside world seem even darker. The experience leaves a bitter taste in your mouth that has nothing to do with the food. You have survived for another week, but at the cost of a piece of your family's history, a piece of your soul. The Torgsin store was not a place of hope. It was a meticulously designed machine for converting memory into grain, sentiment into survival. It was the state's final, most intimate act of requisition. The worst of the famine eventually subsides, not because of a change of heart from the state, but because there are fewer mouths to feed in the system. In its brutal way, begins to stabilize. You survive. You are one of the lucky ones. You leave the haunted fields of the collective farm behind and find work in one of the gigantic new industrial projects that the Torgsin gold helped to build. You are now a builder of socialism, a member of the urban proletariat. Your life is governed by the factory whistle and the production quota, and your diet is governed by the stolovaya. The stolovaya is the public canteen, the factory cafeteria, the beating heart of the Soviet food system for decades to come. The idea is rooted in the early revolutionary dream of liberating women from kitchen slavery. By collectivizing the act of eating, the state would free up individuals for more productive, socialist labor. In practice, it's about control and efficiency. It's about feeding the maximum number of workers with the minimum amount of resources and fuss. Your day begins with the clang of the factory bell, and your lunch break is a hurried march to the Estelovea. The room is vast, echoing, and smells perpetually of boiled cabbage and damp concrete. The furniture is purely functional. Long wooden tables, scarred with decades of use, and simple backless benches. You join a queue, shuffling forward with a metal tray. The clatter of cutlery and the low murmur of hundreds of conversations create a constant, rumbling drought. The menu is not a choice, but a statement of what is available that day. And what is available is almost always the same. The centerpiece of the meal is the soup. It might be sky, cabbage soup, or a borscht, but it's a pale imitation of the pre-revolutionary versions. The broth is thin and greasy. The vegetables are boiled to a uniform mush, and any hint of meat is a rare and celebrated event. More often than not, the soup is a simple, grayish liquid with a few stray grains of barley or millet and a fleck of potato floating mournfully within. The main course is usually a scoop of kasha, the ubiquitous buckwheat or semolina porridge. It's heavy, filling, and bland. It is the caloric bedrock of your meal. Alongside it, you might get a kotlete, a staple of Soviet cuisine. This is not a cutlet of meat. It's a patty made mostly of breadcrumbs, with a small, mysterious percentage of ground meat or fish mixed in. Then fried in cheap oil, it has a distinctive, spongy texture and a taste that is vaguely savory but otherwise forgettable. A dollop of watery potato puree or a spoonful of stewed beets might complete the plate. To drink, there is KOM. It's a sweet, watery beverage made from boiling dried fruit, usually apples or apricots. It's served in thick, faceted glasses. The iconic Soviet granny on Ustakan, which are practically unbreakable. For dessert, if you can call it that, there might be a small, dense square of coffee cake or a simple biscuit. A curious and specific feature of the Estelovea experience was the complex lunch or complex and while bed. This was a set menu, soup, main course, and drink, for a fixed, low price. It was the epitome of Soviet rational eating, a pre-packaged, caloric delivery system. There was no room for preference or personality. You ate what the state provided. Historians see the Estelovea as a microcosm of the entire Soviet system. It was ambitious in its scale and ideological goals, but plagued by chronic shortages, poor quality, and inefficiency. The food was meant to be scientific and rational, providing the precise nutrients needed for an industrial worker. The reality was a monotonous, unappetizing diet that valued quantity over quality, calories over enjoyment. The academic question that still floats around is how this system affected long-term public health. While it may have prevented mass starvation in the cities post-famine, what were the consequences of a diet so reliant on starches and so deficient in fresh vegetables, high-quality protein, and vitamins? You eat your meal quickly, without much thought or pleasure. This is not dining, it's refueling. You are a cog in the great industrial machine, and the Estelovea is your fueling station. The food fills your stomach and gives you the energy to go back to the factory floor for another 4 hours of work. But it does not nourish your spirit. There is no joy in it, no sense of community or comfort that a shared meal can bring. It's anonymous, utilitarian, then gray. You finish your gray soup and your gray kotlete, and you feel a pang of nostalgia for things you thought you'd never miss. You miss the heavy, sour taste of your mother's black bread. You miss the watery cabbage soup she made over the pan, because at least it was made in your own home. You even miss the frantic energy of the NEP markets. The Estelovea represents a new kind of stability, a world where you will likely not starve, but it's a world that has been stripped of all flavor. Life settles into a predictable, gray rhythm, dictated by the factory whistle and the Estelovea menu. You are surviving. You are fed, in the most basic sense of the word. And then, one day, you see it in the window of a state-run bookstore. It's a book, but not just any book. It's huge, beautifully bound, with a colorful, optimistic cover. The title reads, Niga ovike sno I azidorovio I piszcze. The book of tasty and healthy food. You scrape together enough rubles to buy it. Taking it home feels like smuggling a treasure. You open its heavy pages, and you are plunged into a different universe. This is not the reality of your daily life. This is a fantasy, a culinary utopia printed on glossy paper. The book is filled with stunning, full-color photographs, a rarity at the time, of dishes that seem impossibly lavish. You see roasted geese glistening with fat, elaborate multi-layered torts decorated with cream rosettes, platters piled high with cured sturgeon, and bowls brimming with glistening blackened red caviar. There are recipes for complex sauces, delicate pastries, and dozens of different kinds of salads, using ingredients you've only vaguely heard of. Mayonnaise, for example, is presented as a cornerstone of civilized dining. The text is just as fantastical as the images. It speaks of the importance of elegant table settings, of using the correct wine glasses, of the art of garnishing a dish. It gives instructions on how to host a proper dinner party, complete with appetizers, multiple courses, and dessert. It describes the Soviet food industry as a triumph of abundance, a land of plenty where modern factories produce an endless variety of high-quality products for the happy Soviet citizen. It talks about sausage and cheese and canned crab meat, as if they are items you could simply decide to buy on your way home from work. You sit in your small, cramped apartment, the smell of the communal kitchen's eternal cabbage, soup seeping under the door, and you stare at a picture of a jellied sturgeon decorated with intricately carved lemon slices. The contrast is so profound it's almost comical. It's a form of psychological whiplash. The book is not a reflection of reality. It's a love propaganda, a vision of the communist future that is perpetually just around the corner. It is a promise, printed and bound, of a life that does not exist for you or anyone you know. A particularly fascinating and telling detail about the Book of Tasty and Healthy Food is who commissioned it. It was the brainchild of Anastas Mikoyan, the people's commissar of the food industry. He had traveled to the United States in the 1930s and was deeply impressed by American mass production techniques for things like ice cream, canned goods, and hamburgers, which would inspire the Soviet kotlety. The book was part of his campaign to create a modern, socialist food culture that was both efficient and, at least aspirationally, sophisticated. It was a top-down attempt to create a Soviet haute cuisine. Historians and cultural critics see this book as one of the most surreal and significant artifacts of the Stalinist era. It's a complex document. On one hand, it's a blatant piece of propaganda, designed to mask the grim reality of food shortages and project an image of prosperity that was pure fiction for the vast majority of the population. On the other hand, for generations of Soviet women, it became a kind of domestic Bible. While they could never cook the lavish meals depicted, they could adapt the simpler recipes. It provided a vocabulary for food and cooking, a benchmark for what a good meal could be, even if it was unattainable. The academic question is, did this book create widespread cynicism due to the gap with reality, or did it genuinely provide a sense of hope and domestic aspiration for people living in difficult conditions? You close the book. The vibrant colors of the photographs are seared into your mind. You will never make these dishes. You will likely never even see most of these ingredients in a store. But the book does something strange to you. It reawakens a part of your mind that had gone dormant. It reminds you that food can be more than just fuel. It can be about pleasure, creativity, beauty, and generosity. In a way, the book is crueler than the shortages themselves. The shortages are a simple, brutal fact. The book presents a beautiful, detailed lie. You put it away on a high shelf, a strange monument to a life here is supposed to be living. When you go to the Stolovaya the next day for your watery soup and bread-filled kotlety, the meal tastes, if possible, even blander than before. You now have a full-color atlas of a world you cannot reach. The glossy dream of the Book of Tasty and Healthy Food is abruptly shattered by the roar of artillery and the drone of enemy aircraft. It is June 1941. The Great Patriotic War has begun. The precarious stability you know, the gray routine of the factory and the Stolovaya, is obliterated overnight. If you thought the shortages were bad before, you are about to learn a new definition of scarcity. Almost immediately, the national rationing system is reintroduced, but it is far more severe than anything you experienced during the Civil War. The entire country is put on a war footing. Every resource, every gram of food, is redirected to the front line to feed the Red Army. For civilians like you, what's left is meager and distributed with ruthless, militarized light. Your ration card is once again the most critical document you possess. The civilian population is divided into categories, even more rigidly than before. Workers in key defense industries, like the one you work at, receive the highest priority civilian ration. Below you are other workers, office employees, and non-working dependents. At the very bottom are children, who receive a small but vital ration of milk or sugar when available. The portions are minuscule. A worker's daily bread ration in a city like Moscow might be 400 or 500 grams, and it's often the same firewood bread as before, bulked up with potato flour, bran, or other fillers. Meat, fat, and sugar are measured in grams per month, and are often unavailable even if your card entitles you to them. The Estolova, the public canteen, becomes more important than ever. It is the most reliable way to get a hot meal, however thin. The soups are now mostly water and salt, perhaps with a few potato peels floating in it. The cutletti are almost entirely bread, but it's hot, and it's something. The queues are endless, somber affairs, filled with anxious women and elderly men, their faces etched with worry. And then, a new and exotic food item begins to appear. It comes in a rectangular metal tin with 4 unlettering. It's spam, or tushanka, canned stewed meat, or egg powder, or blocks of lard. This is the food of Lend-Lease, the American aid program that supplied the Soviet Union with vast quantities of military equipment, vehicles, and, crucially, food for you. Opening one of these cans is a revelation. The American tushanka, often pork, is fatty and rich, a world away from the gristly, scarce meat you've known. You fry it with potatoes, and the smell that fills your small apartment is intoxicating. It feels like a feast. The egg powder, when mixed with water, can be scrambled into something resembling an omelet, a luxury you haven't tasted in years. These products become a vital lifeline, a source of protein and fat that keeps millions of civilians and soldiers from the brink of starvation. A specific and quirky memory for many Soviet citizens of that time was the taste of American spam. It was so different from anything they had ever eaten, so distinctly foreign and unfatty, that for a generation, the word Lend-Lease became almost synonymous with the taste of that canned meat. It was a symbol of a strange and distant ally, a taste of a world of unimaginable plenty that arrived just in time to help them survive. For years after the war, the state would downplay the significance of this aid, but for the people who ate it, the memory was indelible. Historians continue to debate the exact impact of Lend-Lease food aid. Soviet-era historians tended to dismiss it as insignificant, focusing solely on the heroic efforts of the Soviet people and the Red Army. However, most Western and post-Soviet Russian historians now agree that it was critically important. While it may not have been the largest part of the overall food supply, it provided high-calorie, high-protein foods at critical moments, particularly for the army. The question is not if it was important, but how important. Did it prevent mass famine behind the lines? Did it give the Red Army the caloric edge it needed to push back the invaders? The consensus is that it played a vital, perhaps decisive, supporting role. You learn to make every calorie stretch. You save every drop of fat from the American tushanka to use for cooking later. You boil potato peels to make a thin, starchy soup. You plant a few vegetables in a wooden box on your windowsill. Every crust of bread is precious. You read the fantastical recipes in your book of tasty and healthy food, not with desperation anymore, but with a kind of dark, ironic humor. The gap between that world and your own has become a chasm. The war grinds on. Every day is a struggle for survival, a battle fought on the home front with ration cards and empty stomachs. The food from a distant, unseen ally in a can is a strange miracle, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing hunger. It's a reminder that the world is larger than your suffering, but it also underscores the fragility of your existence, dependent on a global conflict and the mercy of foreign supply ships. The war has brought hunger to your city, but for others, it has brought something far worse. You hear whispers, fragmented stories that filter back from the front lines. Of the city of Leningrad, the stories are so horrific, they are difficult to comprehend. The city has been surrounded by the German army, cut off from the rest of the country. It is under siege. Now, you are no longer just an observer. Imagine you are there. You are a citizen of Leningrad in the winter of 1941. The world has shrunk to the size of this frozen, starving city. The daily artillery shelling is a constant, terrifying rhythm. But the more immediate enemy is hunger. The ration card is your only claim to life. And the rations are being cut, again and again. In the beginning, it was 500 grams of bread for a worker, then 300. Then, at the lowest point, the ration is cut to a mere 125 grams per day for dependents, children, and office workers. That's a single, small, dense slice of bread. And this is not bread as you know it. To make the flour stretch, they mix in everything imaginable: cottonseed cake, cellulose from wood pulp, floor sweepings from the bakeries, wallpaper dust. It's a small, heavy, damp brick that is more a symbol of food than actual sustenance. This is all you have for an entire day. Your life becomes a grim calculus of energy. You move slowly, conserving every calorie. You spend most of your time in your unheated apartment, bundled in every piece of clothing you own, lying in bed to stay warm. The electricity is off. The water pipes are frozen. You have to walk to the Neva River with a bucket, hack a hole in the thick ice, and carry the freezing water home. The simple act can take hours and expend more energy than the bread will provide. The city is silent and dark. The trams have stopped running. The only sounds are the shelling, the wail of air raid sirens, and the soft, shuffling sound of people dragging sleds through the snow. The sleds are used for everything: for carrying water, for carrying firewood scavenged from bombed-out wooden buildings, and, eventually, for carrying the dead. The search for food becomes an all-consuming obsession, pushing people to the absolute limits of human ingenuity and endurance. You boil your leather briefcase, your belts, your shoes, trying to extract some form of gelatinous nourishment. You scrape the wallpaper off the walls to boil it, hoping to get some nutrition from the potato starch paste used to stick it up. You become a chemist in your own frozen kitchen. A particularly grim and specific delicacy of the siege was carpenter's glue jelly. People would find solid blocks of joiner's glue, which was made from animal bones and hooves. They would soak it, boil it, and season it with salt and pepper if they had any, creating a protein-rich but foul-tasting jelly that kept thousands from dying. This single, desperate invention is a powerful testament to the will to survive. The city's scientific community also gets involved in this desperate search. Botanists issue pamphlets identifying edible weeds that can be found in the city parks. Chemists in laboratories work on creating synthetic vitamins from pine needles to combat scurvy. The line between science and survival blurs completely. Historians studying the siege of Leningrad grapple with the unimaginable scale of the civilian suffering. It's widely considered one of the most lethal sieges in history. The debate isn't about the horror, but about the balance of responsibility. While the German army's blockade was the direct cause, questions are still raised about the Soviet leadership's preparedness and response. Were the initial food stocks in the city criminally low? Could more have been evacuated before the ring closed? Was the defense of the city prioritized over the feeding of its people? These are sensitive questions that challenge the heroic narrative of the siege, focusing on the terrible price paid by ordinary people. You see death everywhere. It becomes a mundane part of your daily walk. People collapse from exhaustion in the street and simply freeze to death. You learn not to make eye contact, to conserve the emotional energy it would take to feel pity or sorrow. Your world is stripped down to its most elemental components: cold, hunger, and the tiny 125-gram slice of bread you clutch in your hand. The promise of a tasty and healthy life is a grotesque joke. In this reality, the state that promised abundance can't even provide a crust of real bread. Yet, amidst the horror, there are flickers of incredible humanity. People share their last crumbs of bread. Actors, emaciated and freezing, put on performances in unheated theaters. The composer Dmitri Shostakovich writes his Leningrad Symphony, and it is performed in the besieged city by starving musicians. You survive the winter. You chew on pine needles to keep your teeth from falling out. You eat the glue jelly. You endure. You are living proof that the human body can withstand almost anything, that the experience will leave a permanent scar on your soul, a siege mentality that will never quite fade. You will never again look at a piece of bread the same way. The war is over. The victory celebrations, a brief, euphoric explosion of joy and relief, are faded. You have survived. Now, you stand in the ruins of a country that has been bled white. 27 million dead. Entire cities leveled. The industrial heartlands and the agricultural breadbasket of the nation are a wasteland. The task of rebuilding is monumental, almost inconceivable, and the first task of rebuilding is to eat. The ration cards are still in effect. The state is still in control of everything, but the Lend-Lease scans have stopped arriving, and the nation's own agricultural capacity is in tatters. The collective farms are wrecked. There are no men, no tractors, no horses. The fields are often still littered with unexploded mines. Much of the fieldwork is done by women, teenagers, and elderly men, often using the most primitive tools, sometimes even harnessing themselves to plows. The harvest of 1945 is a fraction of what it was before the war. This grim reality is swiftly followed by another catastrophe. In 1946, the country is hit by the worst drought in half a century. The parched earth yields almost nothing. The result is another famine, less widespread and less deliberately engineered than the one in the 1930s, but still devastating. It hits the newly reacquired territories and the traditional grain-growing regions hardest. For you, in the city, it means the meager rations become even more unreliable. The queues get longer again. The brief hope that victory would mean an end to hunger evaporates. In this landscape of scarcity, one food comes to dominate every meal, every plate. It is the humble, resilient, and utterly monotonous potato. T-A-R-T-S-H-K-A. The potato becomes the new bread, the new center of the culinary universe. It is the one crop that can be grown almost anywhere, in small, private plots, on the outskirts of cities, in makeshift gardens. It requires less labor and is more reliable than grain. For the foreseeable future, your diet will be a symphony in starch. You eat boiled potatoes, sometimes with a sprinkle of salt if you're lucky. You eat fried potatoes, if you can find a spoonful of oil or fat. You eat mashed potatoes, often mixed with water to make them stretch further. You eat potato soup, which is mostly water with a few chunks of potato in it. You learn to make potato cakes, or dranikali, by grating raw potatoes and frying them. This is your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner. A specific and telling food innovation of the post-war years was the potato uniform. This referred to a potato boiled or baked in its skin. In its uniform, people were encouraged to eat the skins because they contained valuable nutrients. A practical piece of advice born from extreme necessity, learning to appreciate, or at least tolerate, the earthy taste of the potato skin was a mark of the times. The state, meanwhile, focuses its efforts on restoring heavy industry, often at the expense of agriculture and consumer goods. The official propaganda speaks of heroic reconstruction, of blast furnaces being REL and dams being rebuilt. But on the ground, life is a grim struggle. The collective farm system, which had already proven disastrous, is reimposed with renewed vigor. The state continues to extract grain from the starving countryside to feed the cities and to create strategic reserves, a policy informed by the trauma of the war. Historians looking at this period see a tragic, missed opportunity. The post-war era could have been a moment for reform, for relaxing the rigid collectivized system and empowering the peasants who had sacrificed so much during the war. Instead, The Stalinist model was doubled down on, prioritizing state, control and military-industrial might over the well-being of the population. The academic debate often centers on the why. Was it Stalin's paranoia? His fear of losing control? Was it a genuine belief that this was the only way to make the Soviet Union strong enough to survive in a hostile post-war world? Or was the system simply too entrenched, too rigid to allow for any meaningful change? You, however, are not debating policy. You are trying to figure out how to make tonight's plate of potatoes taste slightly different from last night's. You work a long, hard shift at the rebuilt factory, and you come home to your family on a meal of boiled potatoes. On special occasions, you might be able to trade something on the black market for an onion or a carrot to add to the pot. These small additions of flavor are momentous events. The book of tasty and healthy food sits on your shelf. Its colorful pictures a distant, mocking memory. The world it depicts seems more alien than ever. You are living in the age of the potato. It's a food that will keep you from starving, but it will not nourish your soul. It's the taste of survival, the taste of rubble and reconstruction, the taste of a victory that feels perilously close to defeat. The war is over, but the battle for a decent meal has just begun again. Stalin's death in 1953 sends a tremor of uncertainty and cautious hope through the country. The age of the potato slowly gives way to a new era, under a new, very different kind of leader. Nikita Khrushchev, is a character, boisterous, impulsive, and, unlike his predecessor, he seems to genuinely care about the everyday lives of ordinary people. He understands that a superpower cannot be built on a foundation of boiled potatoes alone. He promises to improve the food supply, to finally deliver on the revolution's promise of bread, now butter, and he has a big idea, a single, magical crop that he believes will solve all of the Soviet Union's agricultural problems. It is not wheat, it is not rye, it is corn. Kuko, RUZA. Khrushchev had visited the United States, and like McCoy before him, he was mesmerized by American agricultural productivity. He saw the vast, waving fields of corn in the eye and became a passionate, almost fanatical convert. He saw corn as a miracle crop. It could be used for silage to fatten up livestock, which would mean more meat and milk. It could be ground into cornmeal for bread and porridge. It could be eaten on the cob. He was convinced that corn was the key to overtaking America in meat and dairy production. And so begins one of the most ambitious and ultimately absurd agricultural campaigns in history, the Corn Campaign. The entire country is swept up in a maize-induced fever. Corn is the sausage on a stalk. The propaganda posters proclaim. Newspapers, films, and radio programs endlessly extol the virtues of Kuko, RUZA. Collective farm managers are pressured to tear up fields of traditional crops like rye and wheat, crops that have been grown in their regions for centuries, and plant corn instead. Party officials who express skepticism are dismissed. Agronomists who dare to suggest that, perhaps, the climate of Siberia is not ideal for growing a heat-loving crop from the Americas, are ignored. You, on your collective farm or in your city allotment, are now expected to be a corn enthusiast. You are given corn seeds and instructed to plant them. In the South, in places like Ukraine or the North Caucasus, the campaign has some success. The climate is suitable, and the harvest is decent. But the further north and east the campaign spreads, the more disastrous it becomes. In vast regions of Russia and Kazakhstan, the corn simply fails to ripen. The growing season is too short, the summers too cool. The stalks grow to be only a few feet high before the frost comes, yielding tiny, underdeveloped ears. The massive effort results in a catastrophic waste of seed, fertilizer, and labor. Even worse, it has displaced the traditional grain crops that were reliable and well-suited to the local environment. A particularly surreal and emblematic image from this era is that of Khrushchev himself, enthusiastically touring a collective farm, holding up a stalk of corn for the cameras like a trophy, while surrounded by party officials nodding in vigorous agreement. His personal investment in the campaign was so immense that no one dared to tell him it was failing. It was a classic case of a top-down, ideologically driven plan completely ignoring local knowledge and scientific reality. This leads to one of the more embarrassing and little-known crises of the Khrushchev era. In 1963, partly as a result of the disastrous corn campaign and other ill-conceived agricultural schemes, the Soviet Union faces a massive grain shortage. For the first time in its history, the socialist superpower is forced to do the unthinkable. Buy millions of tons of grain from its archrival, the capitalist West, primarily from the United States and Canada. It is a humiliating admission of systemic failure. Historians see the corn campaign as a perfect metaphor for the Khrushchev era itself, full of good intentions and boundless energy, but also impulsive, poorly planned, and ultimately unsuccessful. The academic debate often revolves around Khrushchev's motivations. Was he a naive dreamer, a woolly-minded enthusiast who genuinely believed in his miracle crop, or was he a shrewd politician, using the campaign as a way to shake up the entrenched agricultural bureaucracy and assert his own authority after years in Stalin's shadow? The consensus is that it was likely a mix of both, a genuine, if misguided, desire to improve people's lives, combined with a healthy dose of political ego. For you, the corn campaign is mostly a source of jokes and frustration. You see the pathetic-looking corn stalks in the fields and shake your head. The bread lines, which had shortened after Stalin's death, start to get longer again in the early 60 seconds. You might get to try corn on the cob for the first time, boiled and sold by a street vendor, a novelty, but hardly a dietary revolution. The promised explosion of meat and milk doesn't materialize. The yes to love a menu remains stubbornly familiar. The age of the potato has been succeeded by the brief, baffling era of corn. It's another chapter in the long, frustrating story of the search for a silver bullet, a single big idea that will fix everything. The campaign is a testament to the system's enduring flaw, a profound disconnect between the grand visions of the men in the Kremlin and the simple, muddy reality of the earth itself. The grand, top-down agricultural schemes, from collectivization to the corn campaign, have all ended in various shades of failure. The state has proven, time and again, that it cannot reliably feed its people from the vast, inefficient collective farms alone. But out of this failure, a quiet, grassroots solution begins to flourish, not as a matter of policy, but as a matter of necessity and human ingenuity. This solution is the dacha. The dacha is a small cottage, often little more than a shed, on a tiny plot of land, the classic 6 sotioke, or 600 square meters, on the outskirts of a city. These plots began to be distributed more widely to factory workers and professionals during the Khrushchev era, intended as a place for weekend recreation, a way for city dwellers to get a bit of fresh air. The state envisioned people relaxing, reading, and enjoying nature. But the Soviet people had other ideas. They saw 600 square meters of soil, and they saw a lifeline. The dacha becomes your second, and in many ways, your most important, third. Every weekend, from early spring to late autumn, you and your family join a mass exodus from the city. The trains and buses heading out of town on a Friday evening are packed to the gills with people carrying shovels, watering cans, and bags of seedlings. The atmosphere is one of hopeful, determined labor. Your dacha is not a place of leisure. It is a place of intense, back-breaking work. The small plot of land is meticulously planned and cultivated. Every square inch is used. You build a small greenhouse out of scrap wood and scavenged plastic sheeting to get an early start on tomatoes and cucumbers. You plant neat rows of potatoes, carrots, onions, and beets. You grow dill, parsley, and other herbs that are impossible to find in state stores. You tend to raspberry and blackcurrant bushes. You nurture a few apple trees as if they were your children. This is not socialist labor for an abstract quota. This is for you. Every potato you dig up, every cucumber you pick, is one less item you have to hope to find in the empty state-run grocery store. The dacha becomes the primary source of fresh fruit and vegetables for your family. It's the difference between a monotonous diet of bread and kasha and a meal that includes a fresh salad in the summer. A particularly iconic image of dacha life is the late summer harvest. The whole family is mobilized. You spend weeks picking, washing, and processing the bounty from your tiny plot. The kitchen in your city apartment is transformed into a miniature canning factory. The air is thick with the sweet and sour smell of boiling vinegar and spices. You pickle cucumbers and tomatoes. You make jars of strawberry and blackcurrant jam. Thee or nigh. You preserve mushrooms you foraged in the nearby woods. These jars, lined up in your pantry, are your security for the long, cold winter. They are your personal food reserve. A bull. Work against the failures of the state supply system. Historians and sociologists see the rise of the dacha culture as a profoundly significant phenomenon. It was a semi-official acknowledgement of the failure of the collectivized agricultural system. The state, in a way, outsourced the production of fresh produce to its citizens. The academic question is whether this was a deliberate strategy or a reluctant concession. Did the state encourage dacha plots as a safety valve to release social pressure and supplement the food supply without having to reform the core agricultural system? Or was it an organic, bottom-up movement that the authorities were simply forced to tolerate? It was likely a bit of both, a tacit compromise between the state and its citizens. The dacha is more than just a source of food. It's a refuge. It's the one place where you have a small measure of autonomy. On your 6 plot, you are the master. You decide what to plant, how to tend it. It's a space of creativity and self-reliance in a world that otherwise discourages both. It's where you teach your children about the earth, where families bond over shared labor. It's your private corner of the world, away from the prying eyes of the state. As you head back to the city on a Sunday evening, tired, your muscles achy, your hands stained with dirt, you carry bags filled with fresh vegetables and a sense of accomplishment. The dacha doesn't solve the fundamental problems of the Soviet economy. It doesn't put meat or butter on the shelves of the state stores, but it provides a crucial buffer. It adds color and vitamins to your diet and a measure of control to your life. It is your own small, private victory in the ongoing, daily struggle for food. Khrushchev's chaotic energy is eventually replaced by the gray, ponderous stability of the Brezhnev era. This is the period that will later be known as the ZASTOI, the era of stagnation. The country enters a long, slow, comfortable decline. The terror of the Stalin years is gone, and the frantic, lurching campaigns of Khrushchev are over. Life becomes predictable, and in that predictability, a new national pastime is perfected. Hydrate, the odds red. The Q is no longer the desperate, life or death line of the famine or war years. It is a social institution, a fundamental part of the rhythm of daily life. The dacha may provide you with vegetables in the summer, but for everything else, bread, milk, sausage, trees, toilet paper, shoes, a lampshade, you must stand in line. The economy of developed socialism is a paradox. On paper, it produces immense quantities of steel and concrete, tanks and rockets, but it is spectacularly bad at producing, distributing, and selling the simple things that people actually want to buy. The result is a state of perpetual, low-grade scarcity. Shops are rarely completely empty, but they are never fully stocked. The arrival of any desirable product is a random, unpredictable event, so you learn to be vigilant. You learn to read the subtle signs. A crowd suddenly forming outside the state-run gastronom food store. You join the line first and ask what they're selling later. It might be nothing, a false alarm, but it might be Hungarian salami, or oranges from Georgia, or a batch of freshly made pelmeni, dumplings. You can risk missing out. You become a professional hero. You always carry a voska with you, a string bag that folds up to nothing in your pocket, but can expand to hold a surprising amount of goods. The name itself is a piece of classic Russian art humor, coming from the word avos, which means just in case or on the off chance. You carry it with you on the off chance you stumble upon something worth buying. Standing in these lines, which can last for hours, becomes a unique form of social activity. It's where you hear the latest news, the juiciest gossip, and the most bitter political jokes. Anecdote. You learn about your neighbors' lives, their children's health, their marital problems. You forge temporary bonds of solidarity with your fellow QRS, watching each other's places in line. It is a strange combination of boredom, frustration, and community. A specific and telling ritual of the queue is the numbering system for a particularly long-awaited delivery, like winter boots or a popular book. The first person in line would start a list. People would add their names and a number, and then they could disperse, checking back periodically to make sure the list was being honored. Sometimes, people would write their number on the palm of their hand in ink. This self-organized system was a testament to the people's ability to create order out of the chaos of the state's distribution failures. This era is also when the concept of the deficit, the deficit or shortage good, becomes central to everyone's life. Certain items are in a permanent state of deficit. Good coffee, decent chocolate, quality sausage, books by popular authors. Getting your hands on these items is a major victory, a source of pride. Historians and economists who study the stagnation era are fascinated by this culture of queuing. It is a perfect physical manifestation of a centrally planned economy's core dysfunction, the inability to match supply with demand, without price signals to indicate what people want. Planners in Moscow made decisions based on 5-year plans and production targets, leading to massive overproduction of some goods and chronic underproduction of others. The academic question that arises is about the social and psychological impact. How did spending a significant portion of one's life in queues shape the national character? Did it foster patience and solidarity, or cynicism and a sense of learned helplessness? You finish your workday and head to the shops. You stand in one line for bread. Then you see a commotion at the dairy counter and join another line for 20 minutes to get a bottle of kefir. Then you hear a rumor that the butcher shop 2 blocks away has received a shipment of sosieski, wieners, so you hurry over there, only to find the line stretching around the block. You might wait for an hour, or you might give up. This is your life. It's not a life of starvation. You have your Deutsche produce, your reliable bread and kasha, but it's a life of constant, grinding inconvenience. A life spent waiting. The government celebrates the launch of a new space station, a triumph of Soviet engineering. You celebrate because after 45 minutes in line, you manage to get a small, waxy block of cheese. The gap between the state's grand ambitions and your daily reality has become a permanent, unbridgeable chasm, and you spend your life waiting within it. Your life in the provincial city is defined by the queue and the perpetual shortage. You hear rumors, however, of a place where things are different, a magical island of relative abundance in the vast sea of Soviet scarcity. This place is Moscow, due to its status as the capital and the showcase of socialism. Moscow receives preferential treatment in the supply chain. The best of whatever the country produces is funneled into the city as stores to serve the party elite and to impress foreign visitors. While a Muscovite might complain about shortages, their shortage is a world away from yours. They might be queuing for Yugoslavian boots or a Polish wall unit. You are queuing for basic sausage. And so, a new phenomenon emerges, a unique form of culinary pilgrimage. It is the sausage train, the Kolbezhnaya Electric HK. This is the unofficial name given to the commuter trains that rattle into Moscow every morning from the surrounding towns and cities, sometimes from as far as 200 kilometers away. They are packed not just with commuters heading to work, but with people on a mission. They are people like you, armed with empty backpacks and string Havoska bags. On a dedicated shopping expedition, you wake up before dawn to catch the first train. The journey is long and uncomfortable, the carriage crowded and stuffy, but there is a sense of shared purpose among the passengers. You are all hunter-gatherers, heading to the concrete jungle where the wild sausage roams. Once you arrive in Moscow, you and your fellow pilgrims disperse, heading to the famous food emporiums like Gastronomno, also known as Ulysses Vikis's, a lavish, cathedral-like store with stained glass windows and chandeliers, a relic of pre-revolutionary opulence. Even here you have to queue, but the queues led to things you can only dream of back home. You stand in one line for a kilogram of Dr. S. Kaya sausage, the famous doctor's sausage. You queue again for a block of real butter, not the margarine you usually get. You wait patiently for a net of oranges or a few tins of Bulgarian green peas. You feel a thrill of victory with each successful purchase. You are not just buying food. You are acquiring treasure. The doctor's sausage is a particularly interesting cultural artifact. It was a specific brand of high-quality, low-fat cooked sausage, supposedly developed in the 1930s with a recipe prescribed by doctors to be nutritious and easily digestible for patients recovering from the famine. In the Brezhnev era, it became a nostalgic symbol of quality and a highly sought-after deficit. The very thing people would travel hours to buy. By late afternoon, your bags are full and heavy. You lug your precious cargo back to the train station to begin the long journey home. The evening sausage train is a sight to behold. The carriages are filled with weary but triumphant shoppers. The air is thick with the distinctive, savory smell of smoked sausage. People are guarding their acquisitions, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. You've spent an entire day and a significant amount of money on train fare, all to buy basic groceries. But you are returning a hero, bringing back coveted goods that will make your family's meal special for the next week or two. Historians see the sausage train as a stark illustration of the complete breakdown of the Soviet distribution system. The centrally planned economy was incapable of moving goods rationally across the country. It created a bizarre situation where it was more efficient for 1 million individuals to travel to the food than for the food to be distributed to the million individuals. It's a perfect example of what the economist Janusz Kornoy called a shortage economy, where hoarding and searching for goods become rational, everyday behaviors. The academic question is to what extent this supply centralism was a deliberate policy to reward the capital and keep its population content, versus just a symptom of systemic incompetence. You finally get home late at night, your back aching from carrying the heavy bags. You unpack the sausage, the butter, the cheese. For a brief moment, your kitchen feels like a place of abundance. Your family looks at the hall with wide eyes. The journey was arduous, absurd, and deeply inefficient. But as you fry a few slices of the precious Moscow sausage, and the rich, fatty aroma fills your apartment, you know you will do it all again in a few weeks. It's the only way. You are a citizen of a superpower, and your life has been reduced to chasing a sausage train. You've mastered the art of the cue and the strategy of the sausage train. You can get by, but then you notice that some people don't seem to struggle as much. Your neighbor, the manager of the local warehouse, always seems to have a supply of canned meat. The butcher at the state run store serves his friends first, pulling a better cut of meat from under the counter. The administrator at your spouse's office can get her hands on tickets to the sold-out theater performance. They have something more valuable than money or patience. They have blat. Blat is one of those untranslatable Russian words, but you understand it in your bones. It means connections. Tur, clear. It's the intricate, informal network of favors and mutual obligation that runs parallel to the official system. It is the secret lubricant that makes the creaking, rusty gears of the Soviet economy turn. If the official economy is the skeleton, blat is the nervous system. You quickly learn that what you know is far less important than who you know. The system is based on the simple principle of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You need a new carburetor for your car. You don't go to the store, where they haven't had one in stock for years. You go to your friend who knows a guy who works at the auto parts depot. In exchange, when that guy's son needs dental work, you, a dental technician, make sure he gets seen quickly and gets the good anesthetic, not the cheap stuff. No money changes hands. It is a transaction of favors. Food is the primary currency of the blat economy. The dacha, your private food source, now becomes a source of social capital. A basket of your fresh, homegrown tomatoes is a powerful gift for the doctor who you need to sign a medical leave for. A jar of your special black-a-care jam can persuade the housing administrator to put you on the top of the list for a new apartment. You begin to cultivate your network. The woman who works at the bakery can set aside a fresh loaf of white bread for you. The man who drives the milk truck can sell you a container of real sour cream before it gets to the store. And most importantly, you cultivate a relationship with the prod AVSH, see it say. The shop clerk, she, it was almost always a she, is the gatekeeper. She stands between the scarce goods in the stockroom and the endless queue outside. Being on her good side means she might throw out, why browse it, a desirable item just as you get to the front of the line, or save something for you from the back door. SCA de nego KHO, a small gift, a friendly chat, a compliment. These are investments in your future access to food. A classic example of Blad in action, a little piece of social theater, was the phrase, I'm just asking. Yarokawas prosit. Someone would walk to the front of a long queue, not to cut in line, but to have a quiet, familiar word with the clerk. This was a signal that they were not a regular customer, but part of the network, there to pick up something that had been prearranged. The people in the queue would grumble, but they understood. This was how the world worked. Historians and sociologists consider Blatt to be the essential coping mechanism for survival in a shortage economy. It was a rational response to a dysfunctional system. It recreated a kind of market, but one based on personal relationships rather than currency. The academic debate often centers on its moral ambiguity. Was Blatt a form of corruption that made the system even more unfair, rewarding the well-connected at the expense of others? Or was it a form of social solidarity, a way for people to help each other and circumvent an inhuman and inefficient bureaucracy? In truth, it was both. It was a system that could be used to help a friend in need, but it also created a new hierarchy, a nobility of connections. Your life becomes a complex game of social chess. You are constantly assessing your network, thinking about what favors you owe and who owes you. You need to get your child into a good kindergarten. Who do you know that works in the education department? What can you offer them? A bag of your best Dutch or grown apples. Access to your cousin who works at the tire factory. It's exhausting. It requires constant maintenance, but it's also empowering in a strange way. You are no longer just a passive victim of the system, waiting in line. You are an active player, a weaver of your own small safety net. The state may control the official means of production and distribution, but you, through your network of Blatt, can create your own microeconomy. You have learned the most important lesson of the stagnation era. It's not what's on the shelves that matters. It's who you know in the stockroom. You have your dacha for fresh produce in the summer. You have the sausage train for the occasional Moscow luxury. You have your network of Blatt for everything in between. But there is still one overwhelming, implacable enemy, the Russian winter, for 6 long, snow-covered months. Your dacha is dormant and the supply of fresh food from any source dwindles to almost nothing. The state stores offer a bleak landscape of potatoes, beets, cabbage, and onions, often of poor quality. To survive the winter with any semblance of flavor or nutrition, you must become a master of preservation. You must learn that in the Soviet Union, all things, eventually, can be pickled. The late summer and early autumn are not a time of rest, but of frantic, focused activity. It is the season of I go to VKI, the preparations, your kitchen, and the kitchens of millions of families across the country are transformed into bustling workshops dedicated to a single mission, capturing the fleeting bounty of summer in glass jars. The primary technique is pickling. You pickle everything. Cucumbers, of course, are the star of the show. You stuff them into jars with dill, garlic, horseradish leaves, and black carrot leaves. Then fill them with a boiling brine of salt, vinegar, and water. The result, Solanai y yogurt sai, is a crunchy, sour, garlicky treasure that will brighten up a plate of boiled potatoes in the dead of January. But you don't stop at cucumbers. You pickle tomatoes, both green and red. You pickle bell peppers, squash, and entire heads of garlic. You create complex vegetable mixes. A kind of salad in a jar called dileko, a recipe borrowed from Hungary and adapted to the Soviet palate. You shred cabbage with carrots and salt to make sauerkraut. TVA shinea kaposta, a vital source of vitamin C that has been a Russian staple for centuries. The second pillar of your preservation efforts is jam, or virnai. This is not like Western jam. It's often a thinner syrup containing whole or large pieces of fruit. You make it from the strawberries, raspberries, and blackcurrants from your dacha, or from wild berries you foraged in the forest. You cook the fruit with a staggering amount of sugar, a precious commodity you've been saving up for months, and seal it in jars. A spoonful of this sweet, intense jam stirred into a glass of hot tea is a classic Russian winter comfort, a taste of sunshine in the darkness. And then there is the drying unsalted. You thread mushrooms onto a string and hang them in a dry place until they are leathery and packed with flavor. You salt slabs of pork fat, salo, packing it in salt and spices to cure. A thin slice of this intensely rich, salty fat on a piece of black bread is the ultimate high-energy snack for a cold day. A specific and telling detail of this process is the sterilization of the jars. This was a crucial step, and every family had its own preferred method. Some would bake the jars in the oven. Others would hold them over the spout of a boiling kettle. A precarious, unsteamy operation. The sight of dozens of glass jars, glistening unhot, lined up on a kitchen table, was the quintessential image of the Go to BKI season. Historians see this culture of universal preservation as the final, and perhaps most successful, part of the Soviet food puzzle. It was a domestic, female-driven response to the failures of the state. The state couldn't provide fresh food in the winter, so women took it upon themselves to create their own supply. It represents a massive, uncounted contribution to the national food security. The academic question here is about the sheer economic value of this unpaid domestic labor. How much did the state system rely on this invisible, private subsidy to prevent widespread nutritional deficiencies and social discontent during the long winters? The work is exhausting. For weeks, your apartment smells of boiling vinegar and dill. Your hands are stained from berries and beets. Every spare surface is covered with cooling jars. But with every jar that you seal and carry to the pantry, you feel a sense of profound security. You are building a fortress against the winter. A fortress made of glass and brine. When February comes, and the snow is piled high outside your window, you can go to your pantry and choose your meal. A plate of boiled potatoes, a few crunchy pickled cucumbers, a slice of solo on bread, and a cup of tea sweetened with raspberry virnai. It's a simple meal, but it's a meal you provided for yourself. It's a testament to your foresight, your labor, and your refusal to be defeated by the limitations of your world. You are an expert in the practical arts of food survival, queuing, networking, and pickling. But what does the state, the great architect of your society, think you should be eating? Amidst the daily reality of shortages and cabbage soup, there exists an official, scientific vision of the ideal Soviet diet. This vision is not found in the fantastical book of tasty and healthy food, which is a propaganda dream. It's found in more mundane places, in public health posters in clinics, in articles in women's magazines, and in the culinary norms developed by the Institute of Nutrition of the USS, our Academy of Medical Sciences. This is the world of rational eating, rational noipit and IYE. The emphasis is on science, hygiene, and predictability. The ideal diet is balanced, with a specific, calculated number of calories, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. The state sees food not as a source of pleasure, but as a component of public health and labor productivity. A well-fed worker is a productive worker. In this official food pyramid, certain products are elevated to a special status. At the top is the aforementioned Dr. S. Kaya sausage. Its official origin story, that it was created for the health of the nation, makes it the poster child for the benevolent, scientific Soviet food industry. It's seen as pure, nutritious, and safe. Getting it via the sausage train isn't just a treat. It feels like you're acquiring a state-sanctioned health product. Another hero of this official diet is kefir. This fermented milk drink is promoted endlessly as a panacea for all sorts of digestive ailments. It's scientific, it's modern, and it's produced in state-run dairies. You are encouraged to drink a glass every day for your health. Latamji, slightly effervescent taste of kefir becomes a familiar, comforting part of the Soviet flavor profile. The public canteens, the St. Olovy, has, in theory, the temples of this rational eating. The daily complex NYOBED, said lunch, is designed by nutritionists to provide exactly 1/3 of your daily required calories and nutrients. The fact that the soup is greasy water and the cutlet is 90% bread is a failure of execution, not of the grand, scientific vision. A particularly fascinating unspecific element of this official food culture was the fish day, or YBN. In 1976, a decree was passed making Thursday the official fish day in all Soviet canteens. The logic was twofold: to encourage the consumption of healthy fish and, more practically, to alleviate the chronic shortages of meat. And so, every Thursday, St. Olovy as across the nation would serve up plates of fried pullet, fish cutlet, or soup made with canned fish. The initiative was met with a distinct lack of enthusiasm by the public, and the smell of frying fish in every workplace canteen became a universally recognized and often greeted feature of the Soviet week. Historians looking at these official dietary guidelines see a familiar pattern: a top-down, prescriptive approach that is completely disconnected from the reality of the supply chain. The state could tell people to eat more meat and fresh vegetables, but it couldn't actually provide them. This creates a kind of nutritional dissonance. The academic debate here could focus on the long-term health consequences. Did this official focus on certain healthy but ultimately processed foods, like sausage, and the lack of fresh produce contribute to the specific public health problems, like high rates of cardiovascular disease, that plagued the late Soviet Union? You read an article in a magazine extolling the virtues of a balanced diet, but rich in lean protein and fresh salads. It might even include a sample weekly menu. Monday, beef stroganoff. Tuesday, chicken Kiev. Wednesday, fish, fruit, compote. You look at the menu and you laugh. It's as much a fantasy as the glossy photos in the book of tasty and healthy food. You know what you'll actually be eating. Today is Thursday, so the St. at work will smell of fried fish. For dinner, you'll have the potatoes and pickled tomatoes from your dacha stores. You might drink a glass of kefir before bed, because you've been told it's good for you and, more importantly, it's usually available. You live into parallel culinary worlds. One is the official world of scientific norms and healthy recommendations, a world of perfect balance and state-provided nutrition. The other is the real world of shortages, substitutions, and self-reliance. You navigate the gap between the two with a practiced, wary cynicism. You follow the state's advice when you can, but you rely on your own ingenuity to actually put a meal on the table. The gray, predictable world of the stagnation era, with its comfortable decay and well-worn rituals of queuing and blat, begins to crack. In the mid-1980s, a new leader comes to power. He is younger, more energetic, and he has a new vocabulary. He speaks of perestroika, restructuring, and, most tantalizingly, of glasnost, openness. His name is Mikhail Gorbachev. At first, the changes are subtle. There's a new feeling in the air, a sense that things that were once unchangeable might now be up for debate. Newspapers start to print articles that are cautiously critical. People begin to speak more freely. But for you, the most immediate and visceral impact of these new policies is on the food supply, and it is catastrophic. The reforms, designed to restructure the sclerotic planned economy, have the opposite of the intended effect. The old system of central planning and distribution, inefficient as it was, is dismantled before any new, functioning market system can take its place. The result is chaos. The already tenuous links in the supply chain snap. The trickle of goods to the provincial stores dries up completely. The cure, which were a fixture of the Brezhnev era, now become monstrous, desperate affairs. The shelves, which were once sparsely but occasionally stocked, are now consistently, shockingly bare. You go to the state-run gastronome, and you see empty meat counters, empty dairy cases, empty shelves where there used to be canned goods. Sometimes, the only thing available for sale is a pyramid of 3-liter, jars of birch sap juice, or a sad-looking pile of sea kale. The old joke. What would happen if you introduced communism to the Sahara Desert? For the first 70 years, nothing. Then there would be a shortage of sand. Stops being funny. It feels like a documentary. Rationing, which had been a memory of the war and post-war years, makes a dramatic comeback. You are issued new ration cards. We're telling why. For basic staples. A coupon for sugar. A coupon for soap. A coupon for vodka. A coupon for sausage. But unlike before, having the coupon is no guarantee of getting the product. It just gives you the right to buy it, if you can find it. You might have a sugar coupon that expires at the end of the month, and you spend weeks going from store to store, only to find the sugar sign crossed out everywhere. A specific and surreal symbol of this era was the cigarette shortage. A breakdown in the tobacco factories led to a complete disappearance of cigarettes from the stores. This sparked tobacco riots in several cities, with angry smokers blocking streets and demanding that the authorities do something. It was a stark visual representation of the system's collapse. The state couldn't even provide its citizens with their basic vices. This period, from roughly 1989 to 1991, is a time of extreme economic turmoil. The black networks begin to break down because there is simply nothing in the back rooms to distribute. The sausage trains to Moscow become more desperate than ever. But even the capital's stores are feeling the pinch. Your dacha and your jars of pickles are no longer just a supplement to your diet. They are the foundation of your survival. Historians and economists are still fiercely debating the causes of this collapse. Was perestroika a fundamentally flawed concept? An attempt to reform a system that was unreformable? Did Gorbachev move too slowly or too quickly? Was the collapse an inevitable result of 70 years of economic mismanagement? A bill that had finally come due? Or was it actively sabotaged by hard-line elements within the bureaucracy who wanted the reforms to fail? There is no easy answer. You are living through the death throes of an empire, and it tastes like boiled potatoes and desperation. The openness of glasnost means that for the first time, you can read in the newspaper about the scale of the agricultural disaster. You can hear economists on television openly discussing the failures of collectivization. You are finally allowed to hear the truth. But the truth does not fill your stomach. You look at the empty shelves, and you feel a profound sense of bewilderment. For your entire life, you have been told you live in a superpower, a country that could rival America and send men to space. But that same country cannot provide its people with a bar of soap or a kilogram of sugar. The grand promises of communism, the faded pictures in the book of tasty and healthy food, the scientific jargon of rational eating. It has all culminated in this emptiness, the ultimate, final shortage. The system hasn't just failed to provide luxuries. It has failed to provide the absolute basics. The social contract, however flawed, has been broken. The Soviet system is crumbling, and the empty shelves in your local store are the most potent proof of its failure. But amidst the gray despair and the endless queues for bread, a splash of bright, impossible color appears on the horizon. It is a flash of red and yellow, a symbol so alien and so potent it feels like it has arrived from another planet. It is the Golden Arches. On January 31, the first McDonald's in the Soviet Union opens its doors in Pushkin Square, Moscow. You are not in Moscow, but you see it on the news, and you hear the stories. The event is treated not as a restaurant opening, but as a momentous historical occasion, a geopolitical event. On that first day, an estimated 30,000 people stand in a line that snakes for hours around the square, waiting patiently not just for a meal, but for a taste of the forbidden world, the West. The restaurant itself is a marvel of efficiency and cleanliness, a stark contrast to the sullen service and dubious hygiene of the average Soviet Estulobaya. The staff are trained to be cheerful, to smile, to say, "Can I help you?" A phrase so revolutionary it's almost shocking. The kitchen is a gleaming temple of stainless steel. The system works with a speed and precision that seems magical. And the food, it's so simple, yet so exotic. The Big Mac, the Bolshoi Mac, is a construction of meat, bread, and sauce unlike anything you've had before. The French fries are perfectly uniform, crispy and salty. The Coca-Cola is sweet, bubbly, and cold for the people who taste it. It's not just lunch, it's an experience. It's a bite of America, a symbol of the prosperity and normalcy that has been denied to them for their entire lives. A fascinating, unspecific detail about the Moscow McDonald's was its supply chain. To ensure quality and consistency, McDonald's couldn't rely on the collapsing Soviet agricultural system. They had to build their own, from scratch. They built a massive, state-of-the-art food processing plant on the outskirts of Moscow, complete with its own bakery, meat plant, and dairy. They had to teach Russian farmers how to grow the right kind of potatoes, russet Burbank, not the local varieties, and how to raise cattle to their exact specifications. In a way, McDonald's had to create its own private, capitalist collective farm to succeed. It was a microcosm of the economic transition to come. For you, in your provincial town, the McDonald's is a distant rumor, a story you hear from lucky friends or relatives who have been to the capital. It becomes a symbol of the changes that are sweeping the nation. Some older, more conservative people grumble about it, seeing it as a corrupting foreign influence, a surrender to the enemy. But for most, especially the young, it represents hope, freedom, and a future that might actually be different. Historians and sociologists see the opening of the Moscow McDonald's as a powerful symbolic moment, the Big Mac index of ideological change. It represented the peaceful infiltration of Western consumer culture into the heart of the communist world. The academic debate might focus on what this symbol truly meant. Was it the triumph of capitalism over communism, or was it simply the triumph of a competent business model over an incompetent one? It powerfully demonstrated that a private company could succeed where the entire state apparatus had failed in delivering a consistent, desirable product to the masses. The arrival of Western food is not limited to McDonald's. Small kiosks begin to pop up on city streets, selling Snickers and Mars bars, cans of Coke and Fanta. These items, smuggled in or imported by budding entrepreneurs, become the new deficit, the new status symbols. To be able to casually buy Adidas Snickers bar is to show that you are modern, that you are part of the new world that is emerging. The contrast is stark. You stand in line for hours using a ration coupon to get a loaf of state-produced bread, and right next to the bakery, a private vendor is selling a chocolate bar for a price that would have seemed insane a year ago. The two economies, the dying planned one and the nascent market one, are existing side by side in a chaotic, confusing dance. You haven't tasted a Big Mac yet, but the idea of it, the image of it, has changed your world. It has planted a seed of possibility. It suggests that food doesn't have to be a grim struggle for survival. It can be about choice, pleasure, and even fun. The golden arches rising over Moscow are a signpost, pointing the way out of the gray world of the Soviet kitchen and towards a future that is unknown, uncertain, but definitely more colorful. The end comes not with a bang, but with a series of bewildering television announcements. It is the winter of 1991. There has been a failed coup, declarations of independence, and political maneuvering that feels a world away from your daily struggle for food. And then, on Christmas Day, Mikhail Gorbachev resigns. The red flag with the hammer and sickle is lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The Soviet Union, the monolithic superpower that has defined your entire existence, is officially dissolved. You are sitting in your apartment, in the kitchen that has been the backdrop for so much of your life. It's the place where you watched your mother make potato soup, where you studied the glossy lies of the book of tasty and healthy food, where you spent weeks canning the harvest from your dacha, where you unwrapped precious sausage brought back on the train from Moscow. The country you live in has ceased to exist. But the more immediate question is, what will you have for dinner? Tonight, the meal is a perfect artifact of the final days of the Soviet Empire. It is a meal born of the Talon-Weiss system, the ration coupons. You have a few boiled potatoes, a staple that has been with you through every crisis. Alongside them is a piece of bread, obtained after a long queue, and the centerpiece, The item you spent your last valid sausage coupon on is a small, pale wiener, a sosiska. You fry it in a bit of oil, and its simple, salty taste is the flavor of the era. This is the culmination of 70 years of agricultural and economic policy. It's the final product of collectivization, the 5-year plans, the corn campaigns, and perestroika, a boiled potato, and a single sausage. It's a meal that is neither starving nor satisfying. It is the taste of systemic exhaustion. As you eat, you reflect on the journey. You think of the sour, earthy black bread of your grandparents' time, a food of substance and tradition. You remember the promise of bread, peace, and land, a promise that echoed with so much hope before curdling into the reality of requisition and famine. You think of the gray, utilitarian meals of the Slovenia, the food as fuel for the great industrial machine. You remember the burst of flavor from a can of American Tushonka during the war, a foreign miracle in a time of desperation. You think of the endless fields of corn that refused to ripen, the quiet pride of your Dutch harvest, the absurd ritual of the sausage train. A strange, final culinary detail of this collapsing world is the sudden ubiquity of bush legs, nosy kiborsha. This was the nickname for the huge quantities of frozen chicken leg quarters that began to be imported from the United States as humanitarian aid to feed a hungry post-Soviet Russia. They were cheap, plentiful, and a vital source of protein in a time of near total collapse of the domestic meat industry. For years to come, these American chicken legs would be a staple on the Russian dinner table. A final, ironic twist where the former adversary became the main supplier of the nation's chicken soup. Historians looking back at this moment, the eve of the Soviet collapse, often focus on the big political events, but the story of the food is just as revealing. The empty shelves were not just an economic problem, they were a political statement. They were the most powerful argument against the system, a tangible referendum on its competence. The academic question that will be debated for generations is one of cause and effect. Did the political collapse cause the economic and food supply crisis? Or did the chronic, systemic failure to feed the people ultimately lead to the political collapse? The truth is that they were inextricably linked, a feedback loop of failure. You finish your meal. The Soviet Union is gone. The future is a terrifying, exhilarating unknown. The era of cues and coupons is ending, and a new era of shock therapy, capitalism, hyperinflation, and market chaos is about to begin. There will be new struggles, new challenges, but there will also be new possibilities. The shelves will, eventually, begin to fill with a dizzying variety of goods from all over the world. You will taste a Big Mac. You will see bananas in a store in the middle of winter. You will have to learn to choose, a skill you have never needed before. But tonight, there is only the quiet of your kitchen and the lingering, simple taste of your last Soviet dinner. It's a meal that tells a story, not of grand ideology or military might, but of the simple, enduring, human struggle for a loaf of bread, a story of hunger and hope, of failure and resilience. And so, the long, cold winter of the Soviet experiment comes to an end. The story of its food, from the phantom feasts in propaganda books to the grim reality of a 125-gram bread ration, is a story of a dream that failed. But it is also a story of the people who lived through it, a testament to their incredible, stubborn resilience. They found ways to survive, to find small joys, to provide for their families against impossible odds. They planted gardens on tiny plots of land. They perfected the art of pickling. They built intricate networks of favors, all to fill the void left by a state that had promised everything undelivered. In the end, so little. Now, let the hum of the fan be the sound of a new world dawning, uncertain but full of potential. Let the story settle around you like a soft blanket. The long queues are over. The desperate search is done. There is no need to worry about tomorrow's rations. You can rest now. Let the images fade. The empty shelves, the steaming pots of cabbage soup, the jars of bright red jam, and allow yourself to drift into a peaceful, well-fed sleep. The journey is over. You are safe. You are warm. And in your dreams, there is always enough.